Okay, the following is videotaped deposition of Richard Rosati in the matter of the estate of Joann Matouk Romain, the city of Grosse Pointe Farms. This case is to be held in the United States District Court, Eastern District of Michigan, Southern Division, before the Honorable Linda Berger. The case number is 14 CV 12289. We are located at 90 Kirby Road, Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan. Today's date is August 31st, 2015. The time is approximately 16:01:39. I'll have counsel introduce yourselves, please.
Solomon Radner together with Ari Kresh. We are the plaintiff's lawyers.
May it please the court, George DeGrun on behalf of the city of Grosse Pointe Farms, Daniel Jensen, Ali Krizmanich, Jack Patterson, Andrew Rogers, Richard Rosati, Michael McCarthy, Keith Colombo, Antonio Trupiano, Jeffrey McQueen, Wesley Kipke, John Walco, Frank Zielinski, and Mr. Ricky Good.
Mark Heiser on behalf of Timothy Matouk.
Gus Morris on behalf of the city of Grosse Pointe Woods, Andrew Pazahowski, John Sankey, John Roths, Keith Wazak, and Anthony Schubert.
Mr. Rosati, if you raise your right hand, please. You swear the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Sir, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Richard Rosati, R-O-S-A-T-I.
I see you already had a talk with your attorney about keeping your voice up. That's good. It's going to help us all.
No, I just always talk loud. My wife says so, so this time it's going to come in handy.
The record to reflect that today's date and time of a deposition of Mr. Rosati, and that it will be used, taken pursuant to notice, and it will be used for all purposes permitted by the court rules. Again, just in case you haven't gone through the ground rules with your attorney, I'm going to be asking you questions. We're going to need verbal answers to every question. You understand that?
I do.
No anything like that. Court reporter's not going to know what we're talking about, even though it's a video. If it gets transcribed, we're not going to know what's being said. So therefore, all answers need to be verbal. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
If you answer a question, I'm going to assume that you both heard and understood the question. Fair enough?
Yes.
If you don't understand the question, just let me know, and I'll rephrase it in a way that hopefully makes more sense to you. Cool?
Yes.
Well, lastly, at some point during this deposition, you may hear one of the attorneys say objection. At that time, just don't say anything for a minute. Let them put their objection on the record. I may or may not respond. And then at which time you will then be instructed by your attorney to answer the question. Fair enough?
Very good.
All right. Where are you employed?
City of Grosse Pointe Farms.
And what is it that you're employed to do?
I'm a police officer, detective, commander of the Detective Bureau is my current status.
Commander of Detective Bureau. Correct?
Yes.
How many commanders of the Detective Bureau are there?
Only one.
Do all detectives work? Are you the superior of all detectives?
I am.
Were you the officer in charge of this case involving Joann Matouk Romain?
No.
Do you know who it was, please?
Detective Michael McCarthy.
Just to go back through some of your training, when is it that you started working for the city of Grosse Pointe Farms?
June 1st, 1990.
And what were you hired to do?
I was hired to be a public safety officer.
How long were you a public safety officer?
I have been for 25 years.
Did you ever get promoted between June 1st, 1990 and today?
I did.
When was your first promotion?
1999, promoted to sergeant. I don't remember the exact month or date.
And then?
2002 was promoted to lieutenant.
And then?
January 2006, promoted to detective lieutenant.
And then?
That's it.
That's where you are right now?
That's where I'm at now.
Detective lieutenant, and you're also the commander of the Detective Bureau.
Correct.
What are your duties as commander of Detective Bureau?
I handle cases as well as oversee the cases that are handled by my detectives.
Do you write any policies or procedures that the detectives are supposed to follow?
I do not.
Do you ever instruct them on things that they should or should not do during an investigation?
I do.
Are these things that you say to them verbally? Do you write it down in an email, or do you publish it in some other way to them?
Verbally.
Do you have internal emails that you send to each other about cases?
Yes.
Do you know whether or not there were any emails that were sent internally about the particular case that brings us here today?
There are not.
And how do you know that there are not?
Because I didn't send any, and I know that my detectives didn't either. We communicated verbally always, as we do even now.
So is it common for there to be cases involving missing people or any, well, let me ask you this way. Is it common for there to be cases that you work on where there are no internal emails between you and any other officers about those cases?
Yes.
Do you have any policies in place at your department about emails, as far as what should be sent, what should not be sent?
Objection, lack of foundation and relevancy. Are you asking today, or are you asking as of January 2010?
Thank you. As of January 2010, were there any rules in place governing your emails?
I don't know of any rules in particular. I know that the emails have to be business related, certainly not profane in any way.
Now, prior to 1990, did you receive any certifications, awards, diplomas of any sort?
Prior to 1990,
Yes. Prior to June 1st, 1990.
I was a police officer in Detroit.
So before June 1st of 1990, you were a police officer in Detroit?
Yes.
When were you a police officer in Detroit? For what time period?
October 7th, 1985 to May 1990.
And what was your title there?
Police officer.
Did you ever receive any police officer training, either from an academy or a college or anything else?
Yes.
And please tell us all the training that you've received.
Detroit Police Academy, I think it was called the Detroit Metropolitan Police Academy.
When did you graduate there, please?
I graduated in January of 1986.
And how long of a program was that?
16 weeks.
Anything else?
I've been to many schools throughout my career.
Let's go back to the beginning of your career and let's go through all the schools, please.
I don't have those schools in front of me. The schools range from investigation of drunk drivers to investigation, Reed method interrogation. There has to be dozens of schools that I've gone to. I don't have it in front of me.
Where are these schools located?
Oh, they're all over the metro area. Macomb Community College, Oakland Community College, somewhere in Lansing.
Do you have a resume somewhere that would say everything, all the training you've completed?
I could actually bring up an MCOLS. I don't have a resume to answer your question directly, but on the
Please only answer his questions directly.
No, I don't have a resume.
What were you about to say?
On the MCOLS site, it tracks all of our training. I could easily print up a copy of that and you'd have all of my training.
What is this, an MCOL site?
Yeah, MCOLES stands for Michigan Coalition on Law Enforcement Standards.
And would this have the training that all officers have completed?
Yes,
So this is a site that you have access to?
I do.
Would I have access to it?
No, you'd need a password,
Okay, I don't have a password.
and you don't.
So, but you would be able to go onto this MCOL's website and pull out all the training that all officers have done?
Yes.
Excellent. Let me take your attention to the case that brings us here today. You know what case that is, right?
I do.
And you know that you're a named defendant in the lawsuit, correct?
I do.
Do you see any of the other parties in this room right now, other than lawyers and the court reporter?
I do.
Who do you see here, please?
I see Keith Colombo, Antonino Trupiano, Andrew Rogers, and Timothy Matouk.
Also see the plaintiff, Michelle?
I do see Michelle as well, yes.
Prior to testifying here today, did you, I imagine you talked things over with your attorney. I'm not going to ask you.
Jensen too, I'm sorry. Forgot the chief. Okay, sorry.
He's dressed like a lawyer. I thought he was a lawyer too. That's not a question.
Duly noted.
Prior to you coming to testify here today, did you discuss this case with anybody?
Yes.
With whom did you discuss the case other than your attorney?
Well, that's all. Just discuss it with my attorney.
You didn't discuss it with any of the other officers that are sitting in the room right now?
No.
Did you review any documents before you testified today?
Yes.
Which documents did you review?
The whole case file, including the police reports written by some of the officers in this room. This is the case file that Michael McCarthy had put together as the officer in charge of the case.
And you reviewed that today?
Yes?
Did you talk to anybody other than your attorney today about
No.
your testimony?
No, I didn't.
Question?
I'm sorry?
Question? I mean, you're staring at the witness. Next question.
Thank you. Do you know any of the other defendants in this case personally?
I do.
Who do you know personally, please?
Keith Colombo, Anthony Trupiano, Andrew Rogers, Daniel Jensen, Timothy Matouk.
You know Timothy Matouk?
I do.
How long have you known him?
Well, I'd say about maybe 10 years.
How did you come to know Timothy Matouk?
He's a detective. He was a detective in Harper Woods.
And how did you come to know him?
Professionally, I don't know exact date or time or what it was, but we get to know each other.
Did you eventually become friends with him?
No.
How did you first become involved with this particular case?
On January 13th, I came to work, and Detective Mike McCarthy brought me up to speed on what had happened last night, the night before.
And what did he tell you happened?
He said that he had got called in as the officer who was on call, and that a woman possibly had gone into the lake, and that they had the Coast Guard out there and divers. It's about what I recall him saying.
Did he tell you that there were any other possibilities as to what happened to her other than going into the lake?
No, he just said that she possibly went into the lake, which left there to be a possibility of something else as well. That was one theory.
Did the two of you discuss what else possibly could have happened to her if she did not go into the lake?
We did have a discussion.
And what possibilities did you discuss?
Going into the lake seemed like the most feasible, given the evidence at the scene. Of course, we thought about what else could happen. There's so many different possibilities. She could have been taken or gone somewhere with a friend, hadn't returned yet. Those are maybe two that I can recall. But I think we were focusing mostly on the fact that everything on the scene pointed to the fact that she went in the lake.
And when you say everything on the scene, what do you mean specifically, please tell me the evidence that you believed, that you and Mr. McCarthy believed, led you to conclude that Joann walked into the lake.
The fact that her car, or the car that she was driving, was on the scene, the fact that there were some footprints leading into the lake's edge in the snow, the fact that there appeared to be a butt print, and then a subsequent butt print on the lower break wall. There were no returning footprints, and the woman hadn't been accounted for as of that morning.
How did you know that there were no returning footprints?
He told me so.
Can you tell me, please, what a returning footprint looks like?
It would be pointed in the direction where you're walking. Footprints have a basic outline of a shoe. So a heel looks like a heel, and the toe looks like the toe. Basically, most people walk forward, so if the toe's pointed in the direction that all the prints are pointed, well, that would pretty much give you the direction that they're headed.
How did McCarthy, did he tell you how he knew that there were only footprints going to the water and no footprints coming back?
Based on his observation,
So it was something that he personally observed?
yes.
Do you know when it is that he got to the scene? The night before?
I do not. I don't know exactly. It might have been around 10 o'clock p.m., but that would be a guess.
Okay. Did he tell you whether or not it's something that was told to him by other officers? Or do you recall him telling you that he saw the footprints going to the water and not coming back?
He saw the footprints as well as other officers had told him.
Do you know which other officers had told him?
Keith Colombo, I believe, because he was the officer who first discovered the car unattended.
How about Rogers?
I don't remember if he said Rogers talked to him or not.
You said Colombo. He told you that Colombo was the first one to discover the car?
Yes.
Did you subsequently learn that, in fact, Officer Rogers discovered the car, ran lean, and then left, thinking that there was nothing strange about it, essentially?
No.
Did you?
That's not part of my recollection anyway.
If I were to tell you that Lieutenant Rogers just testified a few minutes before you testified, and he said that he saw the car there during a routine patrol and ran lean, didn't find anything strange, and left, would you have any reason to doubt that?
None whatsoever.
Is that your recollection?
Well, he's already testified he has no recollection. Are you asking if that refreshes his recollection?
Essentially.
It does refresh my recollection. And now that you mention it, I do believe that had been spoken, that he had ran the plate earlier.
Can you tell us what it means to run lean, please?
You just put a plate into the computer, goes to the Law Enforcement Information Network, and you get a return on the plate from Secretary of State.
Is there a record kept of all lean checks that are conducted?
There is.
Where's that record kept?
Well, the dispatcher will run, the dispatcher can actually keep a copy of that. If you're asking, it's just so that I want to clarify, if we keep all of those run sheets, we do not. But
Is the record
there is a radio log that the dispatcher, if they go through dispatch, they will have the plate number that is run, yes.
And what if there's no radio log? What if it's done directly from your car through a mobile data?
I don't know. Maybe Lean keeps a record of those, but they're not kept within the department unless the person who runs the plate wants it kept. And some of those become part of a file based on whatever the outcome of that investigation is.
So you don't know whether or not Lean keeps a record?
I do not.
Do you know how many times on the evening of January 12, 2010, Lean was run on that particular vehicle?
Offhand, no.
What if you look at your documents? Would you know? Would you be able to determine it by looking at your documents, or would there be some missing?
Let me just object to the form of the question and lack of foundation that he would be able to tell, in so much as he's testified there are not always records kept of the access of the lien system for purposes of running a license plate on a vehicle.
That's exactly why I asked him if that's something he can determine by looking at his papers. If that were the case, the answer to that question would be no.
How would he know, by looking at the file, how many times liens activated if there isn't a complete copy of every access of lien?
That's not what I asked him.
But you're asking him to look at the file and determine how many times lien was accessed. That's exactly what you're asking.
That's not what I asked him. What I asked him was if he could determine how many times lien was run by looking at his file. That's a simple yes or no question.
No, it's not.
Sure it is. Because if you can't determine it, because there are no records of it, then the answer to that
How would he
question is
know
no.
if there's no records of it if he didn't access the computer and didn't make a record of his own access? He has no idea. You haven't laid any foundation that he has any knowledge of anyone accessing lien other than what's contained in the case file.
In that case, the answer would be no. He cannot determine simply by looking at his file.
Do you understand
Do
the
you
question?
understand the question?
I do understand the question. No,
You cannot determine it simply by looking at your file?
no.
Okay. Do you know if at any point on January 12th, 2010, an officer from your department contacted the Coast Guard?
I had heard that Lieutenant Rogers contacted the Coast Guard.
Did you at any time during this entire case, or this entire investigation, talk to the Coast Guard?
Only once, when I wanted a helicopter.
When was that?
That was February, it might have been February 6th. I might have the exact address here. Bear with me, I'm looking for a particular.
Please.
Far be it from me, without permission of brother counsel, to suggest, to save time, where his note might be, or the note that would refresh his memory.
Please.
It would be,
It would be on the cover
It is
of
on
the
the cover.
file, and I have not seen that in your copy. If brother counsel wants, I have a copy of it right here.
What is that document?
It's the cover of the case
Yeah.
file folder.
that's what I was looking for. For whatever reason, it is not in this copy. But if I can refer to the cover of the case file.
Can I see it?
Sure.
Can I get a copy of this?
You have a copy of
I do,
it,
I have a copy.
multiple.
Okay.
It's in, but I'll be glad to run you another copy.
Okay, all right.
It's not a big deal.
All right, does that document refresh your recollection as to when it is that you contacted the Coast Guard?
Yeah, it's not going to say exactly the date, but it was the day before we flew over Lake St. Clair, which this says,
Partially cut off in the upper left corner.
okay, so it is February 6th. So probably February 5th, I called the Coast Guard.
And what is it that you told them?
I asked the Coast Guard if they had a helicopter available to fly over Lake St. Clair near the area of Allaire Place in Grosse Pointe Park. A man had called and said that there was a lot of activity on the ice with birds and thought that possibly a body was on the ice.
Were you or somebody else able to find the bird activity that you were looking for with the helicopter?
Well, first we went to the house and we looked with binoculars out onto the ice, and at that particular point there was no activity. But we weren't satisfied with that, so I set out to find a helicopter. So I called the news stations, but they didn't have any available. First they called the Coast Guard. They said they can't do that. They have certain sector patterns that they fly by, and they wouldn't fly over it. So then I talked to, I think it was Channel 4, and they said, well, we really don't have a helicopter. What we do is we subcontract one out, but we wouldn't have one available. So I called the Michigan State Police, and they said, yeah, we'll send you a helicopter. So talking about this refreshes it more, that was a Friday, so that'd be February 4th. February 5th, I was contacted back by David Holliday, Trooper David Holliday, pilot for Michigan State Police, and he said I could get a chopper over to you on Sunday. So I said, oh, that'll work. So that's what happened.
So this thing in the water was reported to you first on Friday, and you didn't get a helicopter until Sunday?
Yes.
How far out from the shore, from the land, was this object?
It was probably 300 yards or so, maybe more.
And you couldn't send a boat or a ship out there?
No, there was ice covered at that particular point.
So this would have been something that was in the middle of an area surrounded completely by ice?
It was.
300 feet away?
Yards.
300 yards away, sorry.
Detective, may I have my copy of
Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Was any of this memorialized, this thing that you just said about
No.
looking for a helicopter and getting this phone call, was any of this memorialized in a police report or investigator's report anywhere?
No.
How do you remember it all with such great detail? Is it just a good memory, or do you have it written down somewhere?
Because it was an unusual event. Not too often do you get to go for a helicopter ride, I suppose.
Who else was involved in this other than you?
Detective McCarthy?
You and McCarthy went for a ride together?
Yes, we did.
Michigan State Police was there too?
Yes,
Was their helicopter?
it was their helicopter,
And
yes.
when you flew over, what if anything did you observe?
Nothing unusual.
What did the object appear to be?
There was no object. We have no idea what the birds were up to, but we didn't see any object at all.
Okay. So when you looked out there with binoculars, it's not that you saw an object there and you just couldn't identify what the object was. You just saw the bird activity. Do I understand it correctly?
No, I didn't. By the time we looked at the house, we didn't even see the bird activity. That was reported by the resident. By the time we got there, there was not even any bird activity, but he directed us to the approximate area.
Do you know what kind of birds these were?
He said seagulls.
Have you received any training that would suggest that seagulls present could be indicative of a dead body being there?
No.
Have you ever heard of such a concept?
Yes. In fact, that wildlife congregates around a carcass, yeah. That's sort of just elementary knowledge.
So you didn't send divers into the water, did you?
No,
You did, well, I don't know if you had anything to do with it, but McCarthy did on the night that Joann disappeared, correct?
Excuse me, what's the question?
Did you understand the question?
I didn't understand, and I'm not going to let him answer anything I didn't understand.
The question was, on the night in question, McCarthy sent divers into the water, correct?
I know the divers were sent into the water. I don't know if it was McCarthy's call or Lieutenant Rogers, who was the commanding officer on the scene. So I know divers were in the water. I have no idea who made that call.
And divers were in the water, if I understand it correctly, because there was a car that was parked or abandoned, and there were footprints leading down to the water.
Yes,
Do you know who saw just a single set of footprints go into the water and not return?
McCarthy, Colombo, I believe Rogers too.
How about Trupiano?
Don't know if Trupiano saw that or not.
McCarthy, Colombo, Rogers, and maybe Trupiano.
I don't know about Trupiano.
But you're definitely sure that McCarthy, Colombo, and Rogers saw the footprints going to the water and not coming back, right?
Yes,
And that was obviously before a whole bunch of other officers and Coast Guard people and other people walked all over the area, and the footprints no longer looked like just one set of footprints.
If you know, you don't have to guess.
I'm not asking you to guess.
I don't know.
Well, I'm going to hand you what's already been marked as Rogers Exhibit 4. I don't know if you guys are okay with me using the same numbers.
No objection.
Good call.
All right. Handing you what's already been marked as Rogers Exhibit 4, which is a picture. Do you know what that's a picture of?
It's a picture of the scene by the lake where Joann Romain had suspectedly gone in, or allegedly gone in.
Do you see the, to borrow Brother Council's term, butt print in the snow?
I do.
And do you see a whole bunch of footprints before that area?
I see footprints laterally in that area and going to it.
Do you only see one set of footprints walking there and no sets returning?
This picture doesn't show that.
Okay, so what I'm trying to determine here, and what I'm trying to ask you specifically is, if I would ask you to list all the officers who saw the virgin footprints, just the footprints walking to the water and none returning, before all of that happened in that picture, your understanding is it's McCarthy, Colombo, Rogers, and you're not sure about Trupiano, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And it's because they told, McCarthy told you that?
Yes,
And and Colombo and Rogers also told you?
I believe so. It's been a while, so
It's possible McCarthy told you that that's what they told him?
that's possible.
One or the other? Either they told you...
No, it's either possible that McCarthy got that information from them or that he saw them himself. I believe he saw them himself, but then he would have been later called to the scene. So I don't know what else I don't know if McCarthy saw this picture the way it is.
Okay. Do you know what time McCarthy made it to the scene?
No,
Do you know if it was before or after the Coast Guard got there?
I don't.
Do you know what time the Coast Guard got there?
No,
And the only time you ever talked to the Coast Guard for this entire case is when you called them to ask them for the helicopter. Is that true?
yes.
Do you know who else talked to the Coast Guard?
Lieutenant Rogers, I believe.
Anybody else or just him?
No, just Lieutenant Rogers.
So whatever information the Coast Guard has, they would have gotten, if they got it from the Grosse Pointe Farms, public safety, they'd have gotten it from Rogers, right?
Objection, lack of foundation. How on God's green earth would you ever know that?
I think it's a pretty simple thing for him to know.
I wouldn't know that. I just wouldn't know that. I know that Lieutenant Rogers contacted the Coast Guard. If somebody else contacted the Coast Guard unbeknownst to me, I don't know,
Would they memorialize that in a report?
maybe.
If somebody were to contact the Coast Guard about a particular investigation, would protocol require them to memorialize that in the report?
Not necessarily.
Okay, can you please explain to me a situation in which it would be okay for an officer to reach out to the Coast Guard and discuss something with them and not memorialize that in a report?
Sure. When you're requesting a helicopter to fly over the lake and they don't have one, thanks a lot, but I didn't write it down. So there's the personal example.
Okay, and as well as the Michigan State Police eventually bringing you a helicopter and
Exactly.
flying over there. None of that ended up in a report. That's all completely according to protocol, correct?
Sure.
Do you know what was told to the Coast Guard on the night that Joann disappeared?
No.
Do you know if anybody from your department ever spoke to the Coast Guard about Joann suffering from any mental illness?
No.
Same question to the Canadian authorities.
No.
Same question to Grosse Pointe Woods.
No.
So just so that I'm clear, is it your testimony that you're not sure if somebody from your department told the Canadian authorities about Joann's mental illness, or is it your testimony that nobody did?
It's my testimony that I don't know if somebody did.
Do you know how that something like that could be determined if somebody suffers from mental illness?
Repeat the question, I don't understand.
For purposes of putting something in a police report, how would an officer determine whether or not somebody has a history of mental illness, depression, anxiety, before they put it into a report and pass along that information as fact?
Well, if you're speaking of a history, I would imagine they would have to get that from a qualified doctor.
Eventually, Joann's body was found, correct?
I'm sorry?
Eventually, Joann's body was found.
Yes, it was.
And how did you learn that it was found?
The Canadian authorities contacted Detective McCarthy.
And what happened after that?
Detective McCarthy contacted me.
And then what happened after that?
McCarthy and I went to Canada to see if we can identify the body.
How soon after hearing that a body had been found did you get to Canada?
It had to be over an hour,
Same day?
same day.
And did you, at that point, notify Joann's family that perhaps her body had been found for identification purposes?
Yes,
So it was that same day that you notified the family?
yes, same day.
And do you know who it is that you contacted?
I contacted two people from the family, Michelle Romain and Bill Matouk.
And you went to Canada together with McCarthy?
Yes.
And the two of you, how long were you in Canada with the Canadian authorities?
Oh, well, if you mean on the scene or the whole time from crossing the border and coming back,
Crossing the border, talking to them, coming back, how long did the whole thing take?
about a couple hours.
And for that entire time, were you and McCarthy together?
We were.
And you were communicating with the Canadian authorities, correct?
Yes.
And do you know, did you or McCarthy at any point while you were meeting with the Canadian officials tell them that Joann suffered from mental illness and was suicidal?
I have no recollection of ever having said that to the Canadian authorities.
Do you feel comfortable sitting here saying under oath that you did not say that?
I do feel comfortable under oath saying that.
How about McCarthy? Did he say that?
Speculation.
He was there the whole time.
I never heard McCarthy or recall hearing McCarthy say that to the authorities.
Did either of you tell the authorities that on January 12th, she drove her vehicle to the edge of shore at a marina in Grosse Pointe and walked into the water?
No, we wouldn't have said that.
I'm sorry. There's actually 2 pages to that.
What number is this?
This is,
Exhibit 1. So why don't you just ask for another exhibit first page identified.
could you mark both pages as Exhibit 1, please? The record should reflect that this is a 2-page document. The second page has been marked as Exhibit 1. Now the court reporter is going to mark the first page of the document as well. So we're going to have a 2-page document, both pages of which are going to be marked.
Suggestion, 1 and 1A, page 2.
Well,
It's
1 is already page 2.
Form too.
1 is already page 2, so it'd be
Yeah, but you
1A.
put an A after it, and it can be page 2, and you can put a sticker on page 1 and call it 1.
Look at all this experience.
Isn't that something? Dang, that physics degree is going to pay off one of these days yet.
You only know that because of all your experience. That's a great idea. Let's do that.
Mark, once again.
I don't need to see it twice. Keep it in order, please. So counsel, can you identify for the record what these 2 pages are for the sum, so it's clear?
Unfortunately, at this point, I have completely and thoroughly confused myself, and I need to figure that out first. I see what that gives me. All right, let's go off the record for a second, please.
The time is 16:46:20. We're not off the record.
Let's just clean this up. I'm sorry.
The time is 16:48:47. We're not back on the record.
No. Okay, I'm handing you what has been marked as Exhibit 1. This is page 1 of the supplementary report done by the Ontario Provincial Police.
Anyone in particular? Would this be Constable Chris Coney, C-O-E-N-E?
I don't have it in front of me right now because I handed it to him.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And you see over here, it's reflected in this report that Detective McCarthy also indicated the female was extremely paranoid and suffered from mental health issues. McCarthy also indicated that no foul play was suspected in their missing person investigation. Do you see where it says that, where I highlighted it?
Let me just object to him answering any questions concerning this hearsay document that was authored by another individual that is not a member of this department.
I join.
I do see it.
Okay. And is that something indeed that McCarthy told the Canadian authorities?
I don't know what McCarthy told, but I do know that that was indicated in his report. I mean, I see that it says that, but you're asking me if I know that McCarthy said that. I have no idea. I wasn't privy to the conversation between him and the Canadian authorities on the phone.
Fair enough. I am now handing you what is marked as Rogers 6. And we can take a look at this is page 2 of that same supplementary report.
I see page 1, please. Thank you.
Can you please take a moment to review the highlighted part?
Okay.
I want to ask you, were you there, well, you already said that you were there when McCarthy was talking to the Canadian officials, correct?
In person, yes. Now, if he had a conversation with them, which he did, before he contacted me, I wasn't there for that. So when McCarthy and I were together in Canada, yes, we were always together. And I would have been, but if this happened on the phone, I would know about it.
Now, he did not tell the Canadian, well, you don't know if he told the Canadian authorities that there were tracks in the snow leading from the vehicle to the water's embankment, do you?
He faxed a copy of his report. It was in his report. I don't know if he told him.
Okay, so it was in his report that there were tracks leading from the vehicle to the water's embankment?
Yes.
Were there in fact footprints leading from the vehicle to the embankment?
I don't know if there were. By the time I got to the scene, that didn't exist.
But McCarthy definitely said that there were footprints leading from the vehicle to the embankment, correct?
I don't know if he said that. I know only what's in his report. I believe it was worded that way. I might have to refresh that by looking at his report
Please.
and find out where that might have been. Yep.
Perhaps.
Well, I see in 14.4,
14.1, Trupiano's, you'd send the whole package?
right. So I see in 14.4 where he was advised that he responded to the scene, met with both Rogers and Trupiano. They briefed him on the situation. 14.1, that's in the, this is the old style format, so hold on, I have to go to the new style format. Okay, I see it in 14.1, authored by Sergeant Trupiano.
And what does it say there?
It says tracks led from the vehicle to the water's edge.
From the vehicle to the water's edge.
Yes, that's what the report says.
So this is from the vehicle. Do you know how far the vehicle was from the water's edge?
You want an estimation? I don't know exact amount of feet, but I know the area and I know basically where the car was parked. And I would say that it's about 100 feet.
Do you know if in fact there were footprints leading from the vehicle to the water's edge or only from down that grassy
I
area?
would have no way of knowing in fact, having not been there to see them.
Do you know who the point of contact was between the Grosse Pointe Farms and the Grosse Pointe Woods when this case was turned over to the Grosse Pointe Woods?
Yes,
Who was that place?
it was Sergeant Pazahowski, Andrew Pazahowski.
And who was the point of contact from your department? Was it McCarthy?
Yes, he was the officer in charge of the case, so it was McCarthy.
So the information that Pazahowski got on this case would have been from McCarthy, correct?
There would be some information he got from McCarthy, yes.
And where would he get the rest of the information from?
Objection Foundation.
No. Do you know? Do you know where else he would have
No,
been?
I wouldn't know. I mean, he could have got it from anywhere, I don't know.
Did Michelle Romain tell you that her mother was increasingly paranoid in the last few months of her life?
Yes,
When did she tell you that?
when we met with her on, give me a moment. We met with her at 1:00 PM on January 13th, I believe. Yeah, 1:00 PM, January 13th, we met.
And that's when she told you that her mother was growing increasingly paranoid in the
Yes.
last few months of her life?
Yes,
And is the increasingly paranoid, is that a term that you used or is that a term that she used, if you recall?
I don't recall. I didn't use it, I know that much.
Well, if the term came from somewhere and you didn't use it, then would it be fair to say that she said that?
Yes,
Did she further tell you that her mother told her that there would be, did Michelle Romain ever tell you that her mother feared trouble from a specific person or people?
yes.
And which people or person would that have been?
Tim Matouk,
Anybody else?
possibly her father, but, no, not her father. Possibly her uncle, John Matouk.
Or perhaps her ex-husband, David Romain?
Well, I was going to say that, but I believe later on I had read that
Just stick to your notes.
Well, it says
Just answer the
Michelle,
question.
okay, no, not David Romain.
So, do you recall answering interrogatories in this case?
Yes,
Do you have a copy in front of you?
I do.
If you could please turn to interrogatory 8, which is on page 6. Specifically, I want to ask you about 8B. Please read the question and the answer, and then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question.
On January 14th, 20,
You don't have to read it. You can read it to yourself if you want, or you can read it out loud for everybody. Up to you.
and which subletter are you referring to?
B as in boy.
Okay.
So is this an answer that you're going to stick by, or are you explaining it more now that it was not David Romain, but that it was Joann Matouk that she expressed fear about?
Before answering that, Detective Rosati, I would ask that you read in the entirety the note reflecting your visit and meeting with Michelle Romain, which I believe you misspoke, stating it occurred on January 13th. And as I look at the record in front of me, it appears 1 p.m. on January 14th, 2010. You're not confined to the old style of reporting. If you wish to look to the current narrative style, you are invited to do so.
Just for the record, is that an objection, or are you telling him what to say and do?
You heard it.
I'm asking for you to say on the record
I'm not
that's an
under oath,
objection.
sir, and I'm not answering any of your
Because
questions.
that didn't sound like an objection. So I'm going to, at this point, object to that and say that, as you know, during a deposition, if I ask a question, you can object, and that's about it. You can't tell the witness what to say. Do you understand the question, sir?
I do understand the question. From looking at the old style note, it looked like it was under the heading of January 13th. But I'm referring to the report, so bear with me. Okay, looking at the new style, the updated report, it is January 14th at 1 o'clock p.m.
And the point that I'm trying to get at, that I want to ask you about, is if after talking to Michelle and Kelly, if you had some specific person or people that they suggested may have been responsible for Joann's disappearance.
Before I answer that, may I have that question read back? Let me object to the form of your question and lack of foundation. You've now infused another individual into your question, a Kelly Romain, and this witness has never testified that he spoke to Kelly Romain with respect to this conversation. You may answer over my objection.
Do you want me to ask another question?
No, I have the answer to your question. I see that in my interrogatory, and I do stick by the fact that, yes, originally she did mention her father, basically,
Father?
well, David Romain.
Husband, maybe?
Well, Michelle was talking to us.
Yeah, okay.
So, but then, if you look further in the report, and I will read it verbatim. However, Michelle now thinks her missing mother's disappearance may be involuntary. She states her mother feared trouble from either her ex-husband or Tim Matouk, a relative. Michelle does not have any specific reasons and or information why they would harm her. She also doesn't believe her father would hurt her mother. And that is how I based my answer. Yes, I'm well aware of the fact that at first it was possibly Tim Matouk and David Romain who could have been people who would harm her mother. But she went on to say that she didn't believe her father would hurt her mother. And if you read on further, it says her mother also feared Tim Matouk, who was a police officer, because she thought he was attempting to obtain information on her brother, John Matouk, who allegedly has had both criminal and civil issues involving him. In fact, Michelle did not want to talk about her uncle, John Matouk, and stated it was probably best if we talked to him. Michelle also believes her mother's disappearance could be related to her uncle, who may have targeted his sister for his unknown actions. And so that was the basis for my answer.
So in this interrogatory, you didn't include John Matouk in
I did not.
your answer.
I did not.
You included David Romain and Timothy Matouk, correct?
Correct.
Did you ever investigate whether or not either David Romain or Tim Matouk or John Matouk possibly could have had something to do with Joann disappearing?
I did not.
I know we touched on this before, but do you know who from your department contacted the Coast Guard?
As I said before, I believe it was Lieutenant Rogers.
Do you know if anybody from your department told the Coast Guard that Michelle was looking for her mother Joann since 5 p.m. earlier that day?
I don't know firsthand of the conversation between whoever that was and the Coast Guard.
Is that indicated anywhere in any of your reports or in anything here? Any of the documents that you have here? That Michelle was, let me just finish the question, please. That Michelle had reported that her mother was missing since 5 p.m. that day.
Yes, it's in the reports.
Did Michelle indeed call your department or at any point tell your department that her mother had been missing since 5 p.m.?
I don't know if she did. She didn't tell me that.
Do you know what your report says she did tell?
I would have to peruse the reports.
Please do.
Well, I know I read it, but I can't find it.
Is it possible that you read it in the Coast Guard report and not in your department's reports?
It's possible.
Can you think of any reason that Michelle would have reported her mother missing at 5 p.m. and that would not be in any of your reports?
I don't believe she reported her mother missing. Where would she have at 5 o'clock p.m.?
Did she ever tell anybody in your department that her mother was missing since 5 o'clock p.m.?
Not that I know of. Yep, I'm still looking for it. I know I read it somewhere. It may be in the Coast Guard reports, but if she was going to report her mother missing, I would imagine she would have called Grosse Pointe Woods, since that's where she lives. And Grosse Pointe Woods, from my understanding, did not have any missing report on Joann Romain on January 12th.
Who's had this marked as 2? You've just been handed what's marked as Exhibit 2 of this deposition. It's an excerpt of the Coast Guard report.
Yes, I see.
Well, let him ask you a question.
Do you see there where it indicates that somebody from your department told the Coast Guard that Michelle reported that her mother had been missing since 5 p.m.?
Objection to lack of foundation, calling for speculation on a hearsay document.
Well, I didn't call for any speculation. All I asked you is if you see...
The document clearly speaks for itself, obviously. You don't need him to read it.
Okay.
Go ahead and answer his questions.
Well, it says the local PD got a hold of, it's blanked out, a missing woman who owns the car. She reports that the car owner has been missing since 5 o'clock p.m. local time.
That's not in any of your reports, is it, that that Michelle reported her mother missing since 5 p.m.?
No, it is not.
She never really reported her mother missing that day, did she?
Not that I know of, no.
She at no point told anybody at your department that her mother was missing since 5 o'clock p.m., did she?
No, not that I know of.
One last thing about the footprints. Is it your understanding that the footprints went from the car to the water, or only down the embankment?
You know what? Don't answer that. Let's move on. You've covered that 3 times at least. Yes, it's not privileged, but let's go. It's well after 5 o'clock. Don't answer it.
Can you answer the question, please?
I've instructed my client not to answer it.
On what basis?
I have told you, asked and answered.
Just so the record's clear, the reason that I'm asking this is that there are so many contradicting reports here and contradicting testimony, as you know, Roger's testimony himself, as to where exactly these footprints were, if they even existed, and whether or not they led from the car to the embankment or only down the embankment. Now, obviously, this is a very extremely important piece of evidence, which is why I'm trying to elicit testimony about it, and now you have just instructed the witness to not answer any more questions about it.
Mr. Radner, you've asked him the same question on multiple occasions, period. What your last comment was sounds to me like an argument to the trier of fact, and you're entitled to do that. But you're not entitled to badger my client in N times about the same issue. It's not going to happen on my watch.
Okay. Did any of the other officers tell you that there were footprints leading from the car to the water?
I only was aware of the fact that there were footprints from the embankment. That's what my recollection is, from the embankment down, which was in a linear line to where the car was.
And you previously read the report from either McCarthy
Yes.
that there was actually footsteps coming from all the way from the car down to the water, correct?
Correct.
Do you know what was told to either Grosse Pointe Woods, the Coast Guard, or the Canadian authorities about where the footprints were and where they were going from where to where?
I don't know what anyone may have said.
Do you know who from your department would have been the ones to tell either the Grosse Pointe Woods already answered, so either the Coast Guard or the Canadian authorities specifically about the footprints?
I don't know. I mean, if it was going to be someone, the officer in charge would be the contact person.
I'd like to go off the record, please, for a minute.
Time is 17:13:19, we're not off the record. Time is 17:16:50, we're not back on the record.
How long did this case stay a Grosse Pointe Farms case before it became a Grosse Pointe Woods case?
I believe it was January 14th when we were instructed by the chief to have Grosse Pointe Woods file a missing persons report.
Do you have any idea why you and McCarthy, well, whose idea was it to go down to Canada upon finding out that Joann's body had been discovered?
Both mine and McCarthy.
Why did you go down there if this was a Grosse Pointe Woods case? Why didn't you just tell Grosse Pointe Woods?
There were no Grosse Pointe Woods detectives working on Saturday. We were well aware of that fact. We were still in an assistance mode in case any new information had come up on this case.
Did you contact Grosse Pointe Woods and tell them what was going on and tell them that you were about to go down to Canada to essentially deal with their case?
Before going, no. I contacted them after I had observed the body.
How soon after?
Immediately after we determined that that was Joann.
Did you or McCarthy tell the Canadian authorities that Joann suffered mental health?
I did not.
Objection asked and answered.
Do you remember meeting with Paul Hawk?
I did not meet with Paul Hawk.
Do you know who did?
Yes.
Who did?
Detective McCarthy and Chief Jensen.
You were not there at any time during that meeting?
No.
Did you have a chance to read Paul Hawk's statement?
Yes.
You testified. Okay. Do you believe Joann committed suicide?
Excuse me, what was the question?
Do you believe Joann committed suicide?
Yes.
Does Paul Hawk's statement change that belief in any way or have any effect on that belief in any way?
No.
Is that because you know for a fact that this statement is not true?
No.
Well, if this statement is true, wouldn't that change your thought process as to whether or not this was a murder or a suicide?
Nothing that Paul Hawk said to me or on that statement would have changed my mind. It's contradictory.
What's contradictory?
The facts.
What facts are contradictory to what?
He says that he saw her near dusk at the water's edge with two men near dusk on January 12th. I'll tell you for sure that sunset on January 12th is about 5:12 p.m. So fact that he would see her at the water's edge with two men, suggesting the fact that she was murdered by these two men at the water's edge. And yet she was seen well after dark at a gas station pumping gas. So what did they do? Bring her to the water's edge and say, let's go get gas first and we'll come back.
So when is it that you found out that she was pumping gas after dusk? Before or after you talked to Paul Hawk?
Objection. This characterization of this witness's testimony. He didn't talk to Paul Hawk. Been asking about Mr. Hawk's statement.
Correct. Thank you. You understand the question?
I do understand the question. I didn't talk to Paul Hawk, so rephrase the question.
Same question without you talking to Paul Hawk, reviewing the statement.
Then give me the question again, please.
The question is, when did you learn about this statement that Paul Hawk gave?
I don't know exactly. I believe not long after he gave it, maybe a day, I'm not sure.
And this statement that he gives where he tells you that that she was wearing black clothing, had dark hair, two vehicles, one dark, maybe navy blue, unknown color, parked in the right lane, impeding traffic. As I passed, I saw two men. This entire statement,
Can you find the statement right along with you here?
I have it.
I'll hand it to you. Okay. This entire statement you discredited and are convinced is not true because of the words near dusk. Do I understand your testimony correctly? I don't want to mischaracterize it.
I said that because there are contradictions in the fact that when he sees two people and this woman who he did not identify as Joann Romain, nor was he able to identify the two men. And the fact that he saw this at a near dusk had to be somebody else, because long after dusk, Joann Romain was on video at a gas station pumping gas. So I would have to say yes. This statement is not credible based on the fact that she's seen long after dusk.
Because it was near dusk. So if he would have been mistaken about how near this was to dusk, then could this be a credible statement?
The fact that he says near dusk would indicate that there's some light in the sky. He wouldn't be able to see what he said he saw if it was long after dark, and it would have had to have been because Joann was seen still alive after dark. He could not have seen any of this in the complete darkness. So that, to me, discredits that statement.
So you're saying that when you're driving down Lake Shore, what street was this?
Lakeshore.
Lakeshore. When you're driving down Lakeshore and it's nighttime, and there's a car parked impeding traffic, and you pull up and look outside, you will not be able to see if there are people standing by the water because it's too dark.
That's correct. It's too dark, and the water's edge would be lower than the street level.
Was there snow on the ground at the time?
Yes,
Doesn't snow illuminate things and make things seem lighter than they really are?
if the moon is out.
Was the moon out?
I don't know.
Well, then wouldn't that be an important thing to know before you discredit the statement, simply because it says near dusk?
No.
No, because it's still impossible that the moon was out, and the sun and the light illuminating from the snow gave him more visibility than would be on a typical night?
No, I don't believe he still would be able to see that,
Why is that?
because I traveled that way for 25 years.
And
Very difficult to see down by the lake in the dark.
how far can you see when you look down there?
I don't know.
So what you're saying is if you're driving at night, driving at night on that road and you stop and you look out to the water and there's somebody standing there, you would not see that person. Is that what you just said?
You're not going to see them down at that level. That's correct. Not to mention the fact that there's trees right there.
Are there any streetlights there?
The streetlights are in the middle of Lakeshore, not at the water's edge.
So the illumination from that light wouldn't help possibly either reflect off the snow or help you see just simply to the water's edge?
No, there were trees there that would obstruct your vision, so,
There's trees all along the entire street?
no, just there.
Well, then wouldn't it depend where exactly he saw? Couldn't there be an area in between the trees where he was looking?
Aren't we talking about the fact where her car was parked?
So from the car,
Fact, in fact, here's another contradictory statement, if I may.
well, there's no question asked, but please, go ahead. We're trying to find out the
It
truth.
says near dusk while driving home at Moros and Kirchville. It says not even on the right street.
How far away is Moros and Kirchville from where this,
From Moran and Lakeshore, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile. Different street.
no, it says while driving home, and then it says Moros and Kirch.
Right.
Is it possible that he was heading home, which is around the Moros and Kirch area?
I've just taken the statement as it's written. Near dusk while driving home, Ross and Kirch, I saw a woman sitting on the edge of a break wall across from St. Paul Church on Lakeshore. So,
Well, okay, so it says that he was driving home, and then in parentheses, Moros and Kirch.
Right.
And then he also says that it was across from St. Paul Church on Lakeshore, right?
so those are contradictory statements.
Isn't it possible that it's not contradictory and that he's telling you that his home is in the Moros and Kirchville area, and that's where he was heading when he passed
Oh,
the church?
that's possible.
Doesn't that make sense when you look at his statement?
It's possible.
But you described it anyway.
Yes.
And didn't bother looking into investigating anything that he told, and anything that was here, right? There was, this entire statement warranted no investigation as to whether or not there was any truth or validity to the claims he was making, correct?
Correct.
Mark this, please. And this also, please. And he goes to mark
Is
as,
that number 6?
this is number 3.
3? Okay.
And he was marked as Exhibit 3. Do you know what that's a picture of?
The tree.
Do you have any idea where that picture was taken or by whom?
I don't know who took the picture.
Before you testified that there are too many trees in the way where this incident took place to be able to see from the street all the way to the embankment. Does this accurately depict the trees that you're referring to in that statement?
It's one of the trees. I think there are 3 of them.
There are 3 trees in that picture?
Nope, but there are 3 trees on Lakeshore and Moran.
And how far away are they from each other?
I don't know. I didn't measure them.
More than 5 feet?
Yes.
And when you look from point A to point B and there are 3 trees more than 5 feet away from each other, you can't see past those trees?
Not if you're driving a car and you have got your eyes on the road.
Okay. The thing I've had marked as an exhibit, I believe Exhibit 4, is Paul Hawk's written statement. We have already talked about this. Just got 1 second. please. I'm going to hand you what's already been marked as Rogers 9. Do you know what that's a picture of?
A purse.
Do you know who took that picture?
No.
Do you know whose hand, do you know whose foot is in that picture?
No.
Did you speak to anybody in your department about whether or not Joann was depressed or suffering any mental illness?
I don't recall.
Do you know if anybody in your department talked to any of Joann's doctors or medical providers before concluding that she was mentally ill in some way?
I don't know.
Do you think that would be a reasonable thing to do if you're going to conclude that somebody's mentally ill?
If somebody were to conclude, did someone conclude that?
Well, let's talk in theory for a minute. In theory, if a police officer were to determine, or a detective were to determine that somebody suffered from mental illness, to the extent that he's willing to pass along that information to other law enforcement departments, is that something that detective should check out with a medical provider or a doctor of that person before accepting it as fact?
Asked the way that you're asking it, yes. If he actually in fact called it fact that she was suffering from mental illness. I don't know that anyone said in fact that she was. I don't know that a detective could say in fact that anybody was suffering from mental illness. He could only speculate.
What if somebody just passed along that information and said she was suffering from mental illness?
You're saying what?
Do you think that should require some discussion with doctors before you pass along information that somebody's suffering from mental illness?
Not necessarily, no.
How about in this case?
No.
Why is that?
Because I don't know that they knew. This was just information that we received from her own daughter.
That she was suffering from mental illness.
Possibly.
And that's something that this daughter, Michelle, is sitting right here right now.
That's correct. That daughter right
Told
there.
you
Told me and Detective McCarthy.
that her mother was suffering from mental illness.
No, she just said that it appeared that way. She had been paranoid, thought people were following her, even had the locks changed. So it was unusual behavior. But I don't know that I would want to besmirch her name to everyone else and say, well, she has mental illness because she did those things. These were just observations made by the family.
Okay. I have no further questions.
I have no questions, thank you.
I have some questions. Your title again is?
Detective Lieutenant.
Thank you, Detective Lieutenant. Mark Pizer on behalf of Mr. Matouk.
How you doing, Mr. Pizer?
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
Just so I'm clear, you've known my client, Mr. Tim Matouk, solely on a professional basis, correct?
Correct.
You don't socialize with him?
Not at all.
You've never socialized with him?
No.
But you knew him from his days as a police officer and detective with the Harper Woods Police Department?
Yes.
Do you have any occasions to work together with him?
I do have occasions to work together, even currently, yes.
And that's because currently he's a detective with the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office?
That's correct.
Right. And I presume you find my client to be thorough and diligent in the performance of his professional duties.
Very much so.
He's an officer or a detective now that wants to seek the truth,
That is correct.
and you've always known him to be that way.
Always.
You've never known him to harbor any ill will or malice towards any member of his family.
Not at all.
He's never expressed any type of anger or malice towards Joann Matouk Romain.
Not at all.
Now, I'm sure you've had a chance to read the complaint that was filed against you in this case.
Yes.
All right, and the second amended complaint was filed, and in that complaint, there's various allegations, but I'm going to try to summarize what I consider to be the meat and potatoes of the allegations, okay? And one of the allegations is that all the individually named defendants, that means you, your fellow officers from your department, the fellow officers from the Grosse Pointe Woods Police Department, and my client, Timothy Matouk, all acted in concert with each other to conspire to deny Joann Matouk Romain's civil rights, including her right to equal protection of the law.
That's what the complaint appears to read.
Yeah, and based upon what you know from this investigation and your involvement, is that allegation true or false?
False.
Absolutely.
Absolutely false.
Okay. Now, do you know of any intention by any member of your police department to lose any evidence in this case that, well, let me strike that, let me back up. Did you ever discover any evidence that you felt that established that Mr. Tim Matouk was guilty of the disappearance of his cousin Joann Matouk Romain?
Never found any evidence of such.
All right. Did you or any officer within your department or any officer within the Grosse Pointe Woods Police Department that you're aware of engage in any acts to intentionally lose any evidence that may have incriminated Mr. Tim Matouk?
No.
Are you aware of any actions or omissions taken by any member of the Grosse Pointe Farms or Grosse Pointe Woods Police Department, or specifically my client, Timothy Matouk, that in any way created a special danger where Joann Matouk Romain would be placed in a situation of great risk?
No.
In other words, this complaint has a theory that all the various officers conspired to hide evidence that they believe would incriminate and establish that my client was responsible for her disappearance and ultimate death. You're aware of that?
I am aware of that.
That's the essence of this case.
Yes, that's what I believe is the essence.
And it is a true statement, is it not, that there is no such evidence that in any way not only incriminates my client, but more importantly, establishes any conspiracy by any one or more officers with my client to conspire to hide evidence that would somehow incriminate Mr. Tim Matouk.
There is absolutely no evidence.
And based upon your investigation, and even as you sit here today, you've had a chance to review the file, correct?
Yes.
You've refreshed your recollection.
I have.
And everything that you've looked at, you're confident that you've come to the conclusion that her disappearance was that of an act of suicide.
Yes.
I just want to back up to your notes of January 14th, 2010, when you met with Michelle Romain, you and Detective McCarthy. If you can get those notes in front of you.
I will put that here.
For that particular date and meeting,
Okay.
all right? Just so I heard this right, I was taking my notes down. During that meeting, Ms. Romain indicated that her mother expressed some concern about Mr. Tim Matouk. But Ms. Romain herself admitted they didn't have any evidence that linked Mr. Matouk to her mother's disappearance, correct?
That is correct.
All right. From the day of that meeting through the current date, are you aware of any other evidence that in any way links my client, Timothy Matouk, to the disappearance of Joann Romain
No.
or her death?
No.
Ms. Romain was very active in monitoring the investigation that was being conducted by your department, wasn't she?
Yes.
As any loving family member would be, correct?
True.
And you didn't find fault with that?
Not at all.
Right. In other words, if it was one of your loved ones, and even if you weren't a police officer, you would want to be involved and monitor and assist in the investigation, right?
Of course.
Right. Did it appear to you at any time that Ms. Romain may have been trying to run the investigation? Did you get that impression?
I did.
Could you give us a little more detail on how you were able to formulate that impression?
Well, she didn't believe that we were doing enough. She didn't, but then some of the things that she said weren't true. And like, we never went and checked the church. But I know that from what the officer said on the scene, that they did check the church with her 2 times. So it was things like that that made me believe that she wasn't going to accept any conclusion we made other than the fact that her mother was killed.
So in other words, you're saying that she came to her own conclusion her mother was killed, and short of that, having that explanation established by way of evidence, she wasn't going to accept any conclusion to the contrary.
She would not accept any conclusion, that's correct.
All right.
To the contrary.
All right. Did you discover any evidence in this case that you believe that there was a murder committed?
There was no evidence I ever saw that would convince me that there was a murder.
All right. Did it ever appear that the family members were attempting to set up my client, Tim Matouk, with the disappearance and death of Joann?
Yes, in the sense that Paul Hawk, 4 years later, would then be able to say that it was Tim Matouk that he saw at the water's edge, which made me suspicious, being that your memory of an event would be clearer, closer to the event than it would be later on. In his statement of January 19th, 2010, he doesn't mention the fact that it's Timothy Matouk, but later on in the complaint, all of a sudden his memory became clear that it's Tim Matouk. So, yeah, that made me think it was a bit of a setup.
All right. Let me also inform you that the evidence in this case is going to show that on the date and time in question, my client was a member of the multi-jurisdictional task force known as COMET. You aware of COMET?
Yes, I am.
All right. And he was working on the date and time with a trooper from Michigan State Police, as well as 2 Macomb County deputy sheriffs on surveillance of wanted felons in the city of Warren. Now, with that information being in the record, all right, would that also give you a further basis to conclude that he had nothing to do with her disappearance?
Yes, it would.
You've never known my client to be anything else but an honest and truthful officer in the performance of his duties when you've worked with him, correct?
That's correct.
I have nothing further.
Detective Rosati, you were asked some questions concerning whether or not there was any report made in the Grosse Pointe Farms case file documenting the observation of birds, efforts to engage the Coast Guard helicopter, and ultimately the engagement of the state police helicopter. I'm now going to show you again what you reviewed. And are those handwritten notes by someone that you can identify the handwriting?
Yes.
And whose handwriting is that?
Detective Mike McCarthy.
Have you had opportunity since the filing of this complaint against you and all the other defendants to actually review the original of the case file?
Yes.
Where do those notes that appear on the Xerox I put in front of you appear in the actual case file?
This is on the envelope cover. So this here basically is a envelope that contains the whole case file. This would be on the cover of that envelope.
And would you agree with me that the notes that Detective McCarthy wrote on or about February 6, 2010 mention birds
Yes.
feeding on the ice?
Yes.
Approximately 300 yards from shore?
Yes.
That efforts were made to get the Coast Guard helicopter, but they weren't able to do that and comply with the request?
Yes.
And does it also indicate that McCarthy and Rosati went up in the Michigan State Police helicopter
Yes.
and that nothing was found in terms of anything out of the ordinary as a result of that flyover?
Correct.
Now, have you ever, at any point in time, engaged with any of the named defendants And if you'd like to look at the caption of this case to determine who those individuals are, I'm going to hand you your interrogatory answers. Take a look. Because my question is, have you ever engaged in any type of conversation with any of those defendants to conspire to commit the murder of Joann Matouk Romain?
Never.
Looking at the list of the defendants, have you ever engaged in any conversation or activity whatsoever with any of those defendants to conspire to hide any aspect of a murder, including the name of murderers of Joann Matouk Romain, if indeed she was murdered?
Never.
Have you at any time before January 12, 2010, had any professional contact with Joann Matouk Romain?
Never.
Were you ever aware at any time before January 12, 2010, that Ms. Romain reached out to police departments and officers because she felt she was being followed?
I was not aware.
Same question, because she felt that her cell phone and telephone was being tapped.
No.
Same question with respect to her concerns that someone was invading her home to the degree she needed to change the locks.
No.
Same question with respect to her mail being tampered with.
No.
On January 14, 2010, when Michelle Romain came to the offices here and met with you and Detective McCarthy, did you have any reason to disbelieve what she was telling you?
No.
Did you take it as that she was serious when she said her observations were such that she believed her mother was becoming more paranoid over the preceding months?
Yes.
You believe that she told you that?
Yes, I do.
Did she at any time tell you that any reason as to why her mother was being paranoid? That's just a yes or no.
No.
Can you tell me if at any time before January 12, 2010, you had any professional contact with David Romain?
No.
At any time before January 12, 2010, did you have any professional contact with Joann Matouk?
No.
The fact that Michelle on January 14th said nonetheless, even though she was uncomfortable, but reported to you that John Matouk, her uncle, had criminal and civil issues. Did you have any reason to doubt that that was accurate?
No reason to doubt whatsoever.
Were you ever involved in any criminal issues with John Matouk at any time?
No.
Any civil issues with John Matouk at any time?
No.
I want you to look at the first page of the narrative of January 14th, 2010, and the notes reflecting that meeting with Ms. Michelle Romain. Do you see the very last paragraph?
Yes.
And it's the paragraph, quote, Michelle says that she was with her mother during the day on Tuesday, January 12th, when they were in court on a civil matter, period. She says her brother, sister, and father, Ms. Romain's ex-husband, was also present. She last saw her mother when she left court with her brother, period, unquote.
Her father.
Her father. Left court with her brother, is what mine says.
Mine says
She last saw her mother when she left court with her
oh, with her brother. Okay.
Did I
Michelle
read that
states-
correct?
That's correct.
Now,
And then the next
did she tell you what time it was that she left court?
I don't see it reflected in the report, no.
But she does say right after that that she went to dinner with her father.
Yes.
All right. Could assume that dinner is any time around 5, 6 o'clock, somewhere in that area.
I could assume that.
Are you familiar with the courts here in Wayne County?
Yes.
And that courts often end for the day at 4:30-ish, thereabouts?
Yes.
All right. Did Michelle at any time disclose to you why they were in court on January 12th, 2010?
No.
All right. Now, at any time before January 12th, 2010, did you have any knowledge of any animus that Tim Matouk may have held for Joann Matouk Romain?
No,
Were you ever aware of Joann Matouk Romain ever reporting to anyone that she had been harmed by Mr. Tim Matouk?
no,
Ever been harmed by John Matouk?
no,
Same time frame before January 12, 2010, that she had been harmed by her ex-husband David Romain?
no,
Ever harmed by Bill Matouk?
no,
At any time after January 12, 2010, but for your professional contacts with Mr. Tim Matouk, did you have any other contact with him? And by that I mean contact in person, on the telephone, emails, text, anything of that nature?
only regarding professional matters.
Did you have any contact with Tim Matouk on a professional basis discussing the disappearance of Joann Matouk Romain?
No,
Now, can you tell me, since January 12, 2010, have you had any contact, professional, otherwise, in-person, telephone, text, emails, with David Romain?
no,
Same question with respect to John Matouk.
no,
Have you ever, other than your contact with Mr. Bill Matouk as reflected in the Grosse Pointe Farms case file, had any other contact with him?
Bill Matouk?
Yes.
Yes,
On a professional basis or on a social basis?
social.
And can you explain that to the jury?
He owns a wine store, and I purchase wine from him.
So when you purchase wine from him, I'm assuming you don't go out and have dinner with him.
No,
He doesn't give you a discount on the wines that you purchase.
no,
Do you consider him a friend?
no,
At any time before January 12, 2010, were you ever made aware of any telephone conversations that may have allegedly taken place between Joann Matouk Romain and Tim Matouk?
no,
At any time after January 12, 2010, excluding any statements or allegations in the complaints that had been filed in this case, were you ever made aware of any alleged telephone conversations that may have allegedly taken place between Joann Matouk Romain and Tim Matouk?
no,
At any time, did you ever become aware of any intent on the part of Tim Matouk to harm Joann Matouk Romain?
no,
Same question with respect to John Matouk.
no,
Same question with respect to Bill Matouk.
no,
Same question with respect to David Romain.
no.
Mr. Dude, I got about 2 more minutes on these, just.
Okay. I have no further questions.
I have just a couple of very quick follow-up questions. You said that there's no evidence of a murder, correct?
Correct.
Wasn't there a torn purse of the missing woman sitting in her car?
Yes,
That's not evidence of potentially foul play?
it's not evidence of a murder, no.
Is it evidence of foul play?
No, not necessarily.
But it could be.
It's possible.
You said Paul Hawk's memory became more clear when he was able to identify Tim Matouk. Is it possible that he just didn't see pictures of Tim Matouk until he identified him?
It's possible.
So you don't really know whether or not his memory became more clear, or if that's the first time you saw a picture, right?
Correct.
David and John both took polygraphs, right? Do you know about that?
I've heard something of the sort, yes.
So they were contacted at some point by the police and asked about this, right?
I don't know.
Some-
Could have been, as far as the polygraphs, I don't know if that was by the police or if there was a private. So I have no knowledge of that.
Because of the 3 people named, David, John, and Tim, 2 of them took polygraphs, right?
I think so.
There are no canine dogs that were there when Joann went missing, right?
Right.
If there would have been dogs and if she would have been in the area, dogs could have found her, right?
I don't know. I'm not a canine officer.
What do you think? based on your experience?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That's my experience.
Is it your testimony that you've never talked to Tim about this case?
Yes.
You were asked if there was any other evidence linking Tim to the murder, and you said no, but you never really investigated this case as a murder, did you?
We were open-minded about it in the beginning, but no, we didn't investigate as a murder.
The beginning until about 24 hours later?
Yes,
Who did the fingerprinting of the car, if anybody?
I did.
And what were the results?
There were no clear fingerprints, all smudges,
None at all.
none.
None on the purse, none on anything inside the car.
We didn't fingerprint the purse.
Did you fingerprint anything in the car other than the car?
We fingerprinted the car itself.
What about the pocketbook?
No,
How about the door handles? Inside or outside?
yes,
There are no fingerprints found?
no usable prints.
Do you believe, based on your investigation, that she committed suicide at that date and time?
At what date and time?
The date and time in question. I think you know what that is.
Well, why don't you tell
That's
us?
the form of the
'cause-
question.
Right.
Do you know what the date and time I'm talking about?
Talking about January 12th, 2010?
Very good.
I don't know about the time now, but I know the date.
What was that date? And where is it that she committed suicide?
I believe she did. I believe she committed suicide at the,
By walking out into the water?
yes.
I have nothing.
Nothing here.
Nothing here.
The time is 17:57:06 of the deposition. Correct.